Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Dr. Joseph Viteritti, who is the Research Professor of Public Administration at the Robert F. Wagner School at New York University. Dr. Viteritti is really a hometown boy in every respect. He was born in Brooklyn. He got his bachelor's degree in political science at Hunter College and his master's degree at Hunter College and his PhD at the Graduate Center of the City University. He has written many books, but today we're going to be especially discussing a new book that just came out, which is entitled Choosing Equality, School Choice, the Constitution, and Civil Society. Welcome, Professor Viteritti.
Thank you, Herman.
And tell me, what is the basic theme of your book?
Well, this is a book that traces the history of the school choice movement and looking at it and how it's evolved over the last 10 years particularly, which is really defined in terms of charter schools and some experimental voucher programs. The point of the book is that school choice is really turning into an equity issue. It's turned into a moral issue in the sense that the largest constituency now for choice is found in Black and Hispanic communities among poor parents who are looking for alternatives to failing schools in their communities. While the idea began in 1955 with Milton Friedman, and the pedigree sort of suggested a limited constituency in terms of conservatives and people on the right, that has changed significantly today, and what we see is a broadening constituency for school choice. And we see school choice policy, which is really designed around the needs of underserved populations.
Well, in New York City, school choice began with the alternative schools in East Harlem, in District 4, right?
Right. It really began, and nobody even talked about it in terms of choice in those days. It was looked upon as alternative schools that were different and schools that took advantage of the opportunity to innovate in an environment where the leadership supported innovation. And this created choice because they were alternatives to local schools that did things the same way for all people. And what we saw is experiments that brought in new partners into the education process, whether they be museums or cultural institutions or local community groups. And that's what sprouted the school choice movement in New York and obviously got national attention.
Well, in the one of the results of the school choice movement in New York is that now students and parents can pick any school, because in the old days you had to go only to the school that was in your district.
Yeah.
And that was changed. So now,
yeah, theoretically that's
choice.
possible in New York. Unfortunately, the way it works is not as encouraging because there are so few schools that are sought after that there are long waiting lists on the most desirable schools. So conceptually, I think, and legally, yes, we do have a policy of citywide choice, but the unfortunate fact of the matter is that there are a limited number of schools that have the kind of demand that where parents want to place their children, and that's why some of us who are supportive of the choice concept are looking at the charter school movement as one way to provide new opportunities, because what charter schools allow you to do is to create new schools and communities.
Okay, now the next one after the alternative movement was the charter schools.
Right.
And the charter school movement began where?
It began in Minnesota in 1992, and that was the first charter school law to pass in the country. Now 36 states and the District of Columbia have charter school laws. There are 1,700 charter schools around the country. New York passed its law about a year ago, and we've moved rather slowly on it. The way the New York law reads is there are three ways that a charter school could be created in New York City. One is through the State University of New York, which has approved about over 20 now, I believe. And another channel is to create new schools through the regents, and they've only approved 2 so far. And the other possibility is to convert regular public schools in New York to charter schools through the Board of Education.
And
again,
the Chancellor has created
they've created two
district.
schools so far, but again, it's moving very slowly. I'm kind of discouraged by the hesitancy on the part of Livingston Street to move a little more aggressively on that.
Well, the state legislature has limited in New York State charter schools to 100 schools, right?
100 new schools.
100 new schools.
In terms of the creation of new schools, but the Chancellor has unlimited authority to create charter schools through the conversion process. So literally the Chancellor can create, there are 1,100 schools in New York, at almost an unlimited number of schools, which I'm not suggesting they should do, but there's a great opportunity there that needs to be looked at more carefully.
Well, so far there's no indication that there's going to be any large number of schools that the Chancellor or the New York City Board of Education is going to set up.
No, it doesn't seem that.
And you were an assistant to Chancellor Macchiarola, so you're very familiar with the
Yes.
problems in New York City schools.
Yes, I've been following it for quite a while. Yeah, it's been 3 years there.
Now, charter schools, at least, are not as controversial as vouchers because charter schools are public schools, right? And therefore, the unions are not as threatened as they would be as they are in the voucher situation.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that they're less controversial. I think people are somewhat hesitant about them because they are independent schools, and some people see them as a threat to the establishment. The former Chancellor was not very supportive of the charter school concept because it really meant creating schools that were not under his jurisdiction. And obviously, at least from its actions, it doesn't see that the Board of Ed is anxious to move on this either because they've only created 2 schools so far.
The problem, however, in setting up a charter school is that you get the same amount of money for the yearly expense that you would get in the public school system because they're public schools, but there's no money for the capital budget. That is, there's no money for buildings.
One of the problems that's been observed around the country is there's no money for startup funds. And here, so what you have is really voluntary efforts on the part of community groups, parents, sometimes for-profit or non-profit organizations that start their own schools. There's another problem that people are not as aware of, and that is most charter schools are underfunded on the operational cost too. In New York City, if you open a charter school, you get 80 cents on a dollar. You don't get the full funding that a public school would have. And it's problematic for 2 reasons. One, we talk about competition, and one of the hopes of the charter schools is that it would create some healthy competition and provide an incentive for other schools to improve. It's very difficult to compete if you're starting out with a 20% deficit, and it becomes a disincentive for people to open those schools. And it also it's unfair to the kids who attend them, because one of the things we know about charter schools now in this country is that a slightly disproportionate number of the kids who attend there are disadvantaged kids to begin with. People don't leave their schools to go to another school if they're happy with the school they're in. So what you have there is kids who have not been served well in their regular public schools seeking out other opportunities, and when you impose a 20% deficit on them, it's rather an unfair position to place them in.
Now, we haven't had enough experience in New York State with charter schools to evaluate them, but what has been the experience in other states with respect to the performance of students in charter schools as opposed to regular public schools?
The experience has been...
Which states would there be?
Well, it's been Minnesota, Wisconsin, the District of Columbia. I mean, there are 36 states around the country. California has a long history of charter school laws. I think the experience has been mixed in terms of performance, and there's a federal study underway now that should be coming out this year. I think that will be more definitive. One of the things we know, though, about the charter school experience is that when you have asked the parents of kids who go to these schools to assess them, the assessment is very positive, and they're very clear about what they like about these schools. They like the fact that they're schools which have generally high academic standards, which focus on academic subjects like reading and math.
In other words, they don't have social promotion at any of the charter schools.
There's no social promotion that I know of. They like them because the environment is generally a safe environment. Most charter schools are smaller schools, and it creates a sense of community and intimacy that you don't get in larger public schools. So the overall assessment of the parents is very positive so far, and I think that's a good sign because they are the critical, they should be one of the critical components of how you assess any educational experience.
But aside from liking the schools, what is the early assessment of the performance in terms of the students performing at grade level?
It's mixed at this point. There's been, and as I said, I think that we're waiting for a definitive study to come out of Washington this year. So far, it's been rather mixed. In some places, the performance has been better than others. But you need to keep in mind these are new schools. They're just getting up, they're just up and running. There are schools that have not been provided the kind of funding that other schools have gotten. And that's why I continue to emphasize, as I talk about this issue, the need to provide them with the kinds of support they need in order to succeed. I mean, you know, one of the problems with charter schools is that charter school laws, like most legislation that comes out of state legislation, are political compromises. They're compromises between the people who support the idea and the people who don't. And very often we pass watered-down laws that don't allow these schools to grow and to realize their potential the way we could. I mean, funding is one problem. The other problem is that most states impose a cap on the number of schools you can create. You know, so we like to think of it as a market concept, but there are all kinds of artificial constraints set on charter schools with regard to...
Which state has the largest number so far?
Arizona has about 250.
Well, that in itself isn't that much in the whole state, right?
In the whole state, and that's one of the few states that has an unlimited, the law allows unlimited charter schools. And you have a superintendent of public instruction now, Lisa Graham-Keegan, in the state, who was very supportive of the charter school concept. And so we're even beginning to see some evidence there that because you have so many of those schools in it's a small state, remember, it's still less than 5% of the overall population, but you're beginning to see some effect of the competition, and other schools that are losing students to these schools are beginning to show signs of improvement and are offering things they hadn't been offering before in terms of better programs.
Okay, we'll get to the real controversial issue, which is vouchers, right after these announcements.
Do you think you have the power to change the world?
I can change the world one child at a time.
I know I can make a difference in those children's lives.
I teach.
I teach.
Yes, they're teachers, but to the kids they reach, they're heroes.
I teach.
Do you have the power to wake up young minds, to be someone's hero? Teach, to make an impact on our future. Call 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher. Be a hero.
One of the reasons lions roar is to warn threatening bachelor males from other prides to stay away from their young. Here, a lion cub gets a lesson in proper roaring from its father. Teaching this behavior is not just crucial to the pride, but also to the survival of the species. Just a reminder how important it is for fathers to spend time with their children.
We're back today with Dr. Joseph Viteritti, who is the Associate Professor of Public Administration at the Robert F. Wagner School at New York University. And we're talking about his book, Choosing Equality. Now, the last and most important item in your book is the question of vouchers. Tell us about vouchers and why you think that people should support them.
Well, when we look at vouchers today, they're very different from the plans that Milton Friedman put together in 1955. Milton Friedman proposed a universal voucher program which would allow any parent to take a voucher and go to any school they chose to. What we're seeing now in Milwaukee and in Cleveland is targeted voucher programs that are designed to help kids who are underserved. In Milwaukee and Cleveland, they're targeted on the basis of income. In Florida, we have a statewide voucher program, but it's targeted at kids who attend what are considered chronically failing schools.
Now, in the case of vouchers, the students and the parents get a certain amount of money,
right,
which they can take. The money's taken out of the public school system, they take the money and they can take it to any private or parochial school. Is that right?
Well, that's an important question, because what generally happens in these programs is they get the state allocation. They don't always get the local allocation. So some of the money is taken out of the school system. And some people like to see this as a way of taking money out of public education. In some ways, it's a windfall for the local school district, because they retain some of the money, and yet they don't have responsibility for the kid anymore. So this idea of a drain of money is really not true. Not all the money follows the child, but the responsibility is dismissed then.
What about the ability to go to parochial schools? Because the argument that still I don't think has been resolved is whether it's legal to, because of separation of church and state,
right,
to allow vouchers to be used in parochial schools.
Yeah, that's in court now. In each of the cases that I said, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Florida, do allow students to take the voucher to a parochial school. The Supreme Court in Wisconsin has upheld this. The Supreme Court of Ohio has also upheld it on federal constitutional grounds. It is now in the federal courts. A district court said that it was unconstitutional, and that is being appealed in Cleveland at an appellate level. This is a case that most of us believe will make its way to the Supreme Court.
About when? What year?
Probably next year. We will get a decision from the appellate court in Ohio in the spring, and probably next year it will be taken to the Supreme Court, and most folks believe that the court will take this case.
Do you think, assuming the Supreme Court upholds the use of vouchers, do you think that that decision will be conclusive as far as New York State is concerned? Because, as you know, in New York State, we have a more rigid requirement known as the Blaine Amendment,
right,
which specifically forbids the use
right,
of public funds for parochial schools.
Right. That's a good question also, because it depends on how the decision comes down. The court can answer one of two questions or both questions. The first question is it permissible to provide aid to students, for students to attend religious schools under the federal Constitution? The second question is a more difficult one, and that is what happens in a situation where you have a state constitution, you have about 30 of them in this United States, which prohibit such aid. Is it unfair or is it unconstitutional for a state to say you can have a voucher and you can take it to a private school, but you can't take it to a religious school? Does that constitute a form of discrimination? And it remains to be seen whether the court will act on this question the next time around. I mean, these are the kind of questions that the court takes in time. So that may still remain a hurdle, but it's something that should be talked about, because one of the things I write about in the book is the history of the Blaine Amendment. The Blaine Amendment was not created to enhance the religious freedom of people. The Blaine Amendment was an act of bigotry that was enacted by New York and many other legislatures because of an anti-Catholic momentum that had built up around the country. And the Blaine Amendment was really a way of preventing aid so that Catholics could not start their own schools. And the history of it is a rather ugly period in American history, and it's something that many people are not aware of. We turn to the Blaine Amendment as if it's a provision that was meant to provide protections, and actually it was meant to undermine the kinds of protections that were originally enacted in the U.S. Constitution.
No, I'm familiar with the history of the Blaine Amendment because I was a delegate to the State Constitutional Convention, the last one that was held, where we made some basic changes in the state constitution. Some of them were quite good. I was chairman of the Committee on Health, Housing, and Social Services, but all of that was lost because when we went to get approval from the public, the whole issue turned out whether you support the elimination of the Blaine Amendment or not. And even though we try to explain the history of the Blaine Amendment, the fact is that as of then and today, New York State is incredibly divided on the issue of aid to parochial schools, and we were defeated 2-1, and not only that, we were defeated so badly that nobody has even dared to bring up the idea of a new constitutional convention, because the fear is once again we'll get bogged down on the issue of the Blaine Amendment.
Well, I'm hoping that this book and other things that are coming out now make people more aware of the genesis of this ugly law. And I felt very good last year when the Arizona State Supreme Court ruled on an issue, cited one of my articles on this, and noted that the Blaine Amendment really has a very dubious history, and kind of disowned itself from that history and said this was a form of bigotry, and we don't want a Blaine Amendment in Arizona. And I'm hoping that as this history becomes more apparent to people, people will reject the concept.
Entirely aside from the Blaine Amendment, vouchers, as opposed to charter schools, have this strong and passionate opposition from the teachers' unions.
Yes, they do.
And what can be done to overcome that?
Well, I think you're just going to have to see a change dynamic, a political dynamic. I think that vouchers is creating a dilemma for the Democratic Party because on the one hand, you have great opposition from the teachers' union to the voucher concept. On the other hand, you have a very strong, vocal minority constituency within the Democratic Party who really wants to see vouchers tried and want alternatives for their kids so that their kids can make the same kinds of choices as other kids can. I mean, the reason why this is really an issue of equity is to ask the question, should we have choice in this country, is really an academic question. We do have choice. Most middle-class people exercise choice all the time. They do it either because they have the economic mobility to move to school districts where the public schools are good, and there are many of those, or they have the means to support a private school education. What we have in this country is a system where choice is limited to those who can afford it. And that's why this is an issue of equity. And what these new voucher plans are doing is they're targeting poor people and saying, we want to give you the same opportunity to choose for your child as middle-class people do. So when we hear this debate, it's really an academic debate.
No, you see, the problem with the debate is that there's an inherent contradiction. On the one hand, you argue, and the polls indicate, that the poor people, blacks and Hispanics, would like to have vouchers, right?
Right.
By overwhelming margins.
Over 60%, according to an Edinburgh poll that was
and the
last
Public
month.
Agenda and other polls have shown this consistently.
Exactly.
On the other hand, the ones who are most passionately in favor of vouchers and alternatives to public schools are people on the right wing, the think tanks that would be considered right wing. So that we now have a dichotomy where the strongest and most passionate supporters are on the right and the ones who most want it are on the left. But they don't seem to get together because, for example, in New York City, while the black and Hispanic parents might be for vouchers, when Mayor Giuliani says he's for vouchers, he is attacked by practically all the Democratic elected officials, especially the black and Puerto Rican caucus. Now, how do you explain that, and how do you reconcile the fact that black and Hispanic parents are for vouchers and school choice, but black and Hispanic elected officials in the same community are not?
It's a question of who's leading the parade. And at this point, the parents are taking their cues from the elected officials. But I think that's going to change. And I think the more parents demand alternatives for their kids, the more that the elected officials are going to have to take their cue from the parents, as we saw in Wisconsin and as we saw in Ohio. I mean, what was interesting about those laws passing is they were very interesting coalitions that, it included, the free market types from the right, it included business leaders, and it included minority parents. It was an interesting coalition that came about of people who agreed that choice had to, the time had come. And I think you're going to see more and more of that in states. I think it's going to be very hard for Democratic Party officials to ignore the demands of their constituencies who are tired of being left in failing schools.
Okay, but the argument that has not as yet been completely answered is this. Why not spend the efforts in improving the public school system rather than looking for alternatives to the public school system? In other words, is this idea of choice ultimately going to result, if carried to its logical extreme, in the destruction of the public school system?
Well, first of all, it's not an either-or thing. You can invest in public education, as you should, and still provide opportunities for parents. The problem with saying, let's invest more, let's change to public schools, is it's done on a promise. And I've been doing this for about 20 years now, and we've been promising to improve certain schools. If you have a child in a failing school, and that's really where you have to target this right now, you don't want to wait 5 years for things to get better, because if your kid is in the 2nd grade, by the time things get better, your child will have gone through elementary school. Okay, we can't.
And you think
put
it would
the
take
onus,
at least 5 years for the public
let's
school
say
system?
3 years. Let's say, you know, think of it as a parent. Which parent wants to be told, be patient for the next 3 years? Things are going to get better. When, particularly if you're in a, you know, we have 90 SIR schools now in New York that have been on in this list and off this list, and you know, are chronic failures. Well, you know, we have an obligation to provide alternatives to those children, you know, and a promise is not enough if it's your child. You know, we have a situation here which is very interesting. You have political leaders say, you know, be patient, keep your kid in that school, and they send their own kids to non-public schools.
Okay. We unfortunately are out of time, but as everyone can see, this is a debate that is only going to get more intensive and more heated in the months and years to come. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You can reach us by email at our website, www.cunytv.cuny.edu, or write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. We look forward to hearing from you.